Hi, welcome back, everybody. I am super excited to be here today with Logan Pant, and we're talking about their or his recent paper, Grid in Advertising: How Promotion Focus Influences Consumer Variety Seeking. And this came out in the June 2026 issue of JER, so it's very recent, and is co-authored with Blair Kidwell and Mark Gleim as well too. So thanks so much for being on, Logan.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Of course, yeah. So to start us off, like for people who may not have come across your paper yet, could you tell us a bit more about what it is you investigate and how you go through and do that?
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with grit, which many people in consumer psychology research are, grit is this idea of passion plus persistence towards your long-term goals. So uh, consistency of interest, perseverance of effort, and usually it's looked at in this trait kind of way where it's like, a personality type of trait. And we were interested in what happens when you manipulate it at the state level, when you make it malleable, right? Because I was watching TV, right? I see Nike does a commercial, and I think, oh wow, they're really, showing these people running. They're working really hard. This seems like they're or manipulating grit in the moment, right? Same type of thing. Any football fans out there, the Detroit Lions, right? They literally hired a new coach, Dan Campbell, who really made it like their mantra of like, let's be a gritty organization. And he actually said like, let's bring people into the deep end and like we're going to outlast them. So I was had this idea kind of my whole life. I'm like, what is grit? What does this mean? And then I heard the Duckworth podcast for Armchair Expert with Dak Shepard, and they were talking about this. This is when I was in an MBA program, and I was like, oh, wow, this is really cool. It impacts, you know, health, wellness, education, all these other areas. And then I, go to Google Scholar and I see it's not really looked at in business. And so I got to North Texas and started working with Dr. Blair Kidwell, and we were thinking, how do we, make sense of grit in a way that's kind of new and, add something to the literature. And we realized that there's this innate aspect of grit where you would think grit means let's be consistent, let's maintain the status quo. Well, really, it's like to achieve these hard goals, you need to expand all options, right? And so that was kind of what made us interested in this paper was that kind of counterintuitive aspect of grit. And so that's where we get into the regulatory focus. And, I can talk more about that. I'm sure we're going to get into the studies a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So that's a great intro into grid, and yeah, I think you're right that we haven't really seen a lot of this coming up in consumer behavior or in advertising marketing research at all.
Right.
So it's neat that you're bringing it in.
Yeah.
And I
Thanks.
definitely the Nike ads you mentioned like resonate with me. I always see the
Right.
athletes on that. I'm like, oh, I could be Serena Williams. If only I
Right.
just like spent enough time, right? I'm like, probably not, but still, it gives you that
Right.
hope,
Right.
which is good. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this was my first essay in my dissertation. So, that was a lot of those, like, I had always think of Mamba mentality with Kobe Bryant, where it's like, waking up at 4 a.m. and, what does this mean? And then, like, I was watching that Kobe documentary and it's like, he's switching what he's doing. And kind of the same thing with Tom Brady, where it's like they changed their approach throughout their career. And I thought that was kind of like, kind of, I guess, real tangible example that we could look at and kind of pull. Can't really cite that in a paper, but it provided some sort of existent, I guess, example of this is what grit actually can do for somebody. And it's not just I'm going to wake up and do the same thing I've always done. Because if I do
Right.
the same thing I've always done, maybe I'm not going to improve, or maybe there's just a better option out there. And so that was kind of the idea as variety seeking allows for this means to get to a better option. Because you never really know, right? Maybe you're just die hard Nike, but Adidas has this new running shoe. You're big into running. And if you never try it, right, then you're never going to find that shoe that's going to work for you. So really, I think important for those new brands, new entrants into the market, because how do you compete with Nike? How do you compete with Adidas? Well, you need to, do something that's going to stand out and different. And so when you combine that grit and that regulatory focus, the promotion focus, right? So you are feeling gritty, you want to achieve these aspirational things. Well, you're going to be focused on the benefits rather than the cost. So maximizing, not minimizing. And so if you're a marketer, you're going to want to, you know, really focus on these gritty appeals and this promotion focused appeals.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. So grit and variety seeking and trying out new things. Awesome. I
Right.
love your article because you've got a lot of evidence in it as well too. You've got
Thank
three
you.
different studies and a field study as well. So tell us a bit more about what happens in those and what you go through and take a look at there.
Yeah. And honestly, this was a great review team um, at JAR. So we only two of the studies that were for my dissertation, I believe, actually made it into this
Oh wow.
paper.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so back when we started, it was like kind of before this trend of pre-registration and all of this. So uh, we really, I think, enhanced the paper throughout this review process. But that first study, that was one of my favorite studies I've ever conducted. Is I actually went to a coffee shop and I had a little QR code on my phone. I was like, can you scan this while you're in line waiting? Right. And so I had just a couple items that were similar to the grit scale. They were adapted, but for this, state-based grit, and then asked people, what are you ordering today? What do you order last time? What do you typically order? So we actually found the grittier you felt in that moment, more likely you were to switch your consumption choice. So that was that pilot study. We followed that up with this was a new study from the review process was we came up with this fictitious brand, a wellness company, and then we gave uh, participants their two conditions. So we said, here's a mission statement and here's some customer testimonials. And it was, the gritty condition focused on persistence, perseverance. And then the other condition, it was like, let's maintain the course and like kind of consistency. And then we found um, across, I think, a variety seeking scale. And then we gave them choice. So they could choose would you want to be entered into like I guess would you choose a mystery box or an essentials pack, right? And so essentials pack maintaining the status quo, what's in here. Mystery box could be anything. And so we found you're in the gritty condition, you're more likely to get that or select that mystery box as well. Yeah. Study two, that one stuck around. We looked at a four cell study. I thought it's a little unorthodox, but we looked at grit and promotion, prevention, um, and then promotion, and those four kind of categories. And we adapted what I found was a Samsung ad. So Samsung did a campaign like it takes grit, or it actually had the word grit
Mhm. Oh wow.
in their poster. And so I was like, I just went to PowerPoint and put in a Samsung, phone, and then put in some different messaging, try to keep it consistent across the categories. And we found, when you were exposed to that grit and promotion, that had the most likely evidence for variety seeking. So just had some items there, and then we wanted to bring in and test that full model using like the full process macro. And so we did that with a grit ad. Um, this was kind of an image of like hiking trails. We are trying to keep it open, open to interpretation, and then some messaging. So like a grit advertisement, non-grit advertisement, and then we measure everything. Um, and that also provided some strong support as well.
That's fantastic. Yeah, no, I think
Yeah,
this is something I always like tell, prospective authors, especially meet the editor sessions that we're looking for, seeing a couple different studies like this, just kind of showing it working across different stimuli. And this is
right,
something especially that's useful for, our advertising readers because they want to see that it actually is there before they go through and implement this. And you've got a nice
right,
set of like evidence for this across the different studies you did, which is awesome. So grit, leading to more variety seeking. Yeah.
right, right. And yeah, I completely agree. You're seeing this more with trying to triangulate your data, get multiple different types of studies. And so that's why I think we really wanted to keep that field study in there, even as a pilot study, just to show like it's not just happening in online, online surveys or
Yeah.
online experiments, but it actually, found some correlational data in the field. Uh, and I think now more and more we're just seeing like you want to have qualitative data and you want to have secondary data and just everything to really show this is a strong case to support, the conceptual
Yeah.
model.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess the big takeaway for advertisers is that, if you're advertising something where you want people to explore or, take a bit of a leap of faith, this is, be a good strategy to use.
Right.
Are there any sort of other sort of like takeaways for advertisers from the studies in addition to that, or is that kind of the main one?
Yeah, that's a big one. Um, we were thinking just like an example, not just fitness, but fitness and wellness is a good fit for grit because you see it already. But even just like finance, right? Is you want people to have a diversified portfolio, right? If
Mm,
they come in and you're a financial advisor, maybe this is some of the messaging that you could focus on or rely on a little bit. Um, and then I think it's really impactful for like those new companies or startups, or if you're not Nike, you're not Apple, what can you do? But I do think one area for future research would be let's look at brand loyalty as like where does that come into
mm.
play? Because I mean I know people you could show them any advertisement, but they're only going to buy Ford or they're only going to buy Nike. They're not switching from Apple no matter what you do. So, you know, we're not saying that this is the end all be all here.
Yeah. That's true. I wonder as well about product categories. Like as you were like going through this, and as I was, reading about this earlier, I was wondering like, luxury products, things like that. Does it seem to be as strong of a fit there, or do you think there's some sort of bounds to where this might work as best? Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think product category comes into play. Right. Personally, like I switched from Apple to Samsung, then back to Apple. I think
Okay. Well,
I know so many people that it's like, you know, Apple, they're not switching, or like luxury items, or just I don't know. That's why I said brand loyalty. But I think there's some of those categories where you're just expected to go with one of these major players. You're not going to choose the generic brand, right? Or like I know people that will never buy generic cereal, right? Just because it tastes different or something like that. So it's like let's maybe Kroger shouldn't, put all their eggs in this basket of advertising. But I do think that's another area uh, that could be explored in the future.
yeah. No, it's very cool. I think it's a whole sort of new topic to kind of take a look at with advertising. There's a lot of different places to kind of go with this. Yeah.
Right, right. I agree. Yeah,
Yeah. And you talked a bit about the fact that you've had this as a long-standing sort of idea for
yeah,
some time, which is kind of cool. You sort of seen it percolating for a while. Is
yeah,
there anything that like pushed you to include it in your dissertation? Or was this
yeah.
part of like a larger series of ads or like of studies you're doing in that or yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I have a couple areas that I'm really focused on. Right, grit is one, maybe political ideology is another one. But my whole dissertation it was called the gritty consumer, and so this was the first essay. The second essay look kind of merged those areas, grit and politics, and that was in psych and marketing. Um, but it all really started when I was at Louisville and I just heard that podcast. And so I was like, I'm just interested in grit. And so I wanted to learn more about it. And I think a lot of great research ideas, you just have to have some interest there. Even if, you could go and talk to someone else in the field, right? And they're doing high quality research as well. And they might think, this is not worth pursuing, right? So I think I was very lucky to have, Dr. Kidwell and Dr. Gleim just along the whole way is like they're saying like this is a good idea and this is what we should do. And they really helped develop this, you know, the project. I think early on, like this was my first paper. So like I was week 1 or week 2 at North Texas and Dr. Kidwell was like, yeah, let's start collecting data. Like, let's run a study. I'm like, early doc student. I'm like, okay, like, how do we do that? Like, what does this look like? I remember like not still really understanding SPSS at the time, right? So it's
It is
like,
kind of a horror.
yeah,
Yeah.
I coded it. I guess I didn't know at the time you could export it as numeric values. So like I went in SPSS and hand coded the whole survey after the fact. And I'm like, then I met with him and he's like, oh, you could just export it as numeric. So it's like the whole process is like trial and error and you learn as you go. So like there's so many studies that you're like, oh, I wish we would have did this differently, or could have done this instead. And so that's why I said the review process really helped because I think it made the package of studies, something that was more robust and generalizable than it was before. So
That's good to hear. That's the goal,
yeah,
hopefully.
right.
But on that topic as well, too, one thing I always like to this is something I think especially important for younger scholars because we often see these beautiful articles come out that
Right.
look really nice, and we don't see the making of them in the process. I'm wondering, were there any challenges you encountered during this aside from SPSS,
Yeah.
and then how did you overcome those as well? Yeah.
Yeah. I think early on it was trying to figure out what like we had this idea for we didn't really think of variety seeking right off the bat. Like we had this conceptualization of grit and we're like, like we know that there's something else here, but it was trying to, make that connection of like, what is a meaningful impact? And it can't just be like, oh, this is counterintuitive, so that makes it impactful right off the bat. Like it has to actually add
Right.
to literature. And so I think that was just like a thinking process and reading the literature. Um, I think along the way, like I said, this is my first paper I really led. And so that was a whole nother thing is like going through the review process. How do you respond to reviewers? How do you write a good cover letter? Like all of these things, these details matter, right? So like I've talked to people, it's like they had a paper rejected because, they wrote the wrong journal in their cover letter or something like that. And so it's like, didn't do that. So, but that's a win right there. But still, you know, gets rejected, or you have to go and figure out why did it get rejected, and you're trying to read through these reviewer comments and be like, what do they actually mean here? Right? It's not just, there's nothing here that seemed like a fatal flaw, but they said reject. So why are they saying reject? It's just trying to understand that. I think that was kind of a big challenge.
Yeah, no, it definitely takes practice. I think even especially, I remember the first one I had as well too, and it was like I was just devastated because you get all this critical feedback, and it was a
Right.
revise and resubmit, and I just
Right.
like, well, how do we do this and how do we do that? And like my supervisor was like, oh, you just do this, we'll do that, we'll do this, and I'm like, oh, okay, like he was
Right.
very hopeful, right? And I was like, I had no context for like how to interpret it, right? So
Right.
it just takes time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think having good people around you is huge. It's like someone that you could just go and ask questions. I would email Dr. Kidwell at basically all hours, right, in my program. And I knew I'm like, he's not gonna respond to this because it's 6 a.m. Right? I'm sending this email. I had to like I literally would the whole night would just be like I'd wake up, be like, oh, I have this idea for this experiment. I have to put this in my notes app, right? And so it's like I think it's a whole process figuring out what is your research style and how do you work with others. And, I think being able to accept that criticism is huge. Like if you, I can't imagine doing this career. And it's like, if you just got upset every time you heard something negative, it's like, you wouldn't get very far. It's like, you have to be able to hear this comment. Maybe it's not said in the nicest way possible, but, let's
Uh,
try and make the research better because of it.
yeah. No, oftentimes it's like the reviewers have points. I mean, like I had a paper rejected 3 weeks ago, right? And like my co-authors and I were like, oh, we were so annoyed. And then like looking at it a week later, we're like, oh, they're actually not crazy. We did do some stuff not so
Right.
clearly, you know?
Right, right. Yes.
So it
I,
happens, right?
I
Yeah.
I agree. I think, and even early on, when I was an undergrad, that was when I was first connected with Dr. Gleim, who was on this paper as well. And he was my sports marketing professor. And he's the one
Oh,
who like
nice.
kind of
Yeah.
helped inspire me. I didn't even know I could become a marketing professor until I talked to him. And so I think along the way, he was always kind of like, I feel like don't take things too like seriously to the point where like it's gonna, upset your mental health or whatever it could be. It's like, you can figure it out, we all can figure it out. It's like, this we're not, necessarily doing brain surgery over here. Like this is something that we can sit down today. We have this set of comments. Like let's just figure it out. Or like maybe we just need to run a new study, or maybe we just need to do this. So I really think
Yeah.
having those mentors is really important.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. Well, on that positive note, I think we'll close out. So, for those who are interested, again, it's Grid and Advertising: How Promotion Focus Influences Consumer Variety Seeking in the June 2026 issue of JAR. And so,
Right.
thank you again, Logan, for being on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Of course, and all the best with your new position. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Have a good one.
Cheers.